Come on in, Jim. Finished your voice.
We're sorry for the obstacle course here. We had a million COVID tests in here and a lot of sanitizer, so we had to move some of that, but it's in the back. Everybody's all set?
Yeah.
Okay. First of all, let me...
You started to interrupt you, sir. Yeah.
Let me thank you all for being here right now. And let me start out by saying, I don't know how many Yankee fans are here, but I happen to be a Yankee fan. Not a fair weather fan. You know, I know they're doing well this year. But Aaron Judge hits a lot of home runs. But on occasion, he strikes out. And that means he has 3 strikes against him. He's got to sit down. He's got to think it over and figure out what he could do better next time to make it work. Well, this governor and our previous governor and those 2 administrations, our colleagues on the other side, have put it into place with the criminal justice reform where we're at the point where there are 3 strikes right now. 4.5 years ago, when they put this so-called criminal justice reform in place, the gentlemen in this room who are from law enforcement said, it's probably not going to work. Sit down with us. DA said, sit down with us. Our judiciary said, sit down with us. And we said also, why don't you go out to the public and get their input, have some hearings. Well, none of that really happened. They put together a program which can best be defined as a revolving door of danger and disaster, catch and release. There's a whole bunch of names for it. What we know, and you'll hear it from this case today, from Tammy Patrick and her family, the devastating effects of what they did. They defended it, they defended it, they defended it. Finally, they said, we got 1 strike. Let's reform the reform. We came back with them. They put in place what they called a reform of the reform, and the same thing was happening because they gave very little or no discretion to our judiciary to decide if a person was a danger to themselves or other. Well, the same thing, deja vu all over again. A lot of crime out there. We got Mr. Source speaking up yesterday from both sides of the aisle. It's not just coming from one political affiliation. This goes beyond that right now. You got the mayor of New York City saying New York City is a joke because he cannot control crime. He can't control his own destiny because of this criminal justice reform they put in place. So the 3rd strike was Governor Hochul, which came with that 10-point plan, that program, which he said was finally going to solve the problem. Well, clearly that has not solved the problem. So there's 3 strikes. We had reform of the initial reform, and people are still being devastated in the streets. And today, unfortunately, we have to talk about a classic example of why and how and when that is happening to not only my constituents, but people from Democratic sides of the aisle, Republican sides of the aisle, and what we're calling for today is these 2 bills, and they're very simple. The one bill, S1523A, says, let's come back and start over again. Let's repeal it, go back to what we had for a few moments, bring in all the professionals, go out to the people and hear what they have to say, and let's do it right. So the scales of justice kind of get balanced a little bit, because as you see here, we believe that the predators, and this is a classic example of that, have the leverage now. The other bill is S1521, which says give the judges some reasonable discretion, more so than they have right now, because I'll point out shortly why this judge did not really have the discretion to get this individual, Thomas Quinlan, who is the perpetrator, alleged, off the streets. So at this time, let me explain to you who is here, some outstanding officials. We have Sheriff Richard Giardino here with us, Sheriff Mike Zerlo, Fulton, Saratoga County, and Gloversville Police Chief Tony Clay. Some outstanding law enforcement officials who see on the ground what is happening today. But the most important person here today, I'm going to introduce to you now, is Tammy Patrick and her husband Jan, and her mother Donna is not here today, but she is as devastated as the entire family. And I think it's important to hear it not from our voices, but to hear it from the voices of the individuals who are crying out for help from us as public officials. Tammy called me. I saw what was happening. I understood what was happening. But she took the time to have the courage to call me to say, what can I do? What can my family do to turn my personal tragedy into something positive for the rest of the individuals and the families of New York State? I said, when she asked me what I've done, I told her about the 2 bills. We've got to get those passed. We've got to go back and do this right. We've got to make sure that these individuals who are violent are getting off the streets. But just as importantly, we're providing some mental health care maybe for some individuals who have those problems, or some anger management mandated as a qualifier for these individuals when we take them off the street. But definitely, when they have a violent situation like this, they have to be taken off the street. Let me just tell you before I bring Tammy up what took place that day, kind of a timeline. John Lee was allegedly killed by Thomas Quinlan, who was arrested and charged with assaulting another man the day before this murder and then released. Prior to the bail reform law passing, the judge would have had the discretion, and this is important, of being able to hold the defendant on bail, preventing the loss of life. On June 8th at 12:30, Thomas Quinlan was first arrested for assault in the 3rd degree, an A misdemeanor. And this is what's important. Under the bail reform law, this is a non-qualifiable offense for bail unless it's a hate crime or other qualifying factors such as missing a day in court, prior arrest, or other allegations he committed a crime before. All those qualifiers made this a non-bailable serious assault. Quinlan was also charged with criminal obstruction of breathing, an A misdemeanor also. This is only qualifying under the bail reform law, present new law, if the victim is a member of the same family or a household or intimate partner, but not for a random act of violence, which this first arrest was. And I think the Chief, you mentioned it. Sometimes the random acts are more serious and lead to more violence than those with a family member. And these are the qualifiers which stopped the judge from getting that individual off the street. So what I'd like to do right now is introduce to you the most important person to talk to you about why she feels she needs to speak out, not only for her family, not only for the legacy of her father, but for the families across New York State, and that's Tammy Patrick. And we thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you. Good morning. On June 9th, 2022, my family faced an act of violence that we never imagined would happen to us. The suspect was released just hours before and was back on the streets to cause much damage. He broke through a fence just before midnight, entering my parents' yard, and was there for at least 40 minutes. It is suspected that he started a fire in a back shed to lure my dad out of his home. Once my dad came out to retrieve the hose and extinguish the fire, the suspect then attacked my dad, stabbing him several times, causing the end of his life. According to the evidence, my dad did not go without a fight, and I am sure it was to protect the love of his life, my mom. With that, let me tell you about my dad. He worked hard all of his life to provide for his family. He loved his wife, daughters, grandchildren, and great-grandchild with all of his heart and soul. He was our protector, our mentor, our problem solver, the one who always made us laugh and appreciate life. He was so many things to so many people, and his loss has been felt with great anguish and pain. On June 17th, he would have turned 78 years old, and we would have celebrated with all the family, enjoying cake and ice cream like we do for all the birthdays. We would have then celebrated Father's Day with an annual barbecue, but instead, we were burying my dad. It is time to give the power back to the judges and keep violent criminals off the street. If this had happened before, my dad might just still be with us here today. I do not want any other family to go through this trauma and grief that we have all experienced. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And We hope something like this has been limited, but it hasn't been limited. We hear this across the state of New York from individuals and family after family, but it's important, and I so appreciate that Tammy understood that getting this information out there, that this policy itself is failing, and it has to be adjusted. And I can't think of a clearer example than what she has just defined for us. I'd like to have Sheriff Giardino, who's been calling for this and really understands what's taking place for a long time, ever since this policy was put in place. He and Sheriff Zerlo have been working together to try to explain what needs to be done, and it's been falling on deaf ears. But we have to keep speaking out. We have to be showing the examples of how this is failing, this policy, and I'd like to have him speak because he has a clear, very clear understanding of the laws and what needs to be done. Thank you, Sheriff, for being here.
Sorry, Tammy. First of all, I want to thank the Senator for holding this presser. We've been trying to keep the pressure on to call for a session. The Mayor Adams of New York City has asked for a special session, and now David Suarez, the District Attorney in Albany. Both are Democrats, both are far from being conservative individuals, and they will tell you that. But they see the devastation caused by many of the reforms. The concern that we in law enforcement, and I include Sheriff Zerlo, myself, and the other sheriffs, in Chief Clay, I can speak at this point for, we were never consulted. I don't mean us individually, I mean law enforcement in general, judges, probation, parole. They were never consulted. Mental health specialists, substance abuse counselors were never consulted about what changes would be most beneficial to everyone and still protect the public. Criminals don't discriminate. They don't care what color you are. They don't care what political party you are. They don't care what your job is. And this lack of discretion has created a situation where people who are career criminals, there's a reason we call them career criminals. Now, until the governor changes us calling them career criminals so we don't hurt their feelings like we just did with inmates, there's a reason they're career criminals, because they prey on other people. They do this as a form of a living or because of other issues. When they took away the discretion of the courts, they damaged the benefit we had in assessing whether somebody was more of a risk and less. We're the only state in the country that does not have a public safety component for bail where a judge could consider and use their discretion in public safety. And I only speak as a sheriff. I was a former judge for 20 years, tried over 200 cases, including 40 murder cases, and I've seen firsthand the devastation by individuals who are out on bail or who are released early from prison and parole. I support Senator Tedisco's 2 bills. I think that critically, we in law enforcement are not an enemy of reform. We want reform, but we want practical, reasonable reform that allows the public safety to be the priority without violating individuals' rights. And again, I can cite Sheriff Jeff Murphy's not with us, but Washington County Sheriff. He's got a Facebook site that he posted, Reform Bail Reform. He did it as soon as bail reform was passed, and the public is more than welcome to go there and see daily examples of individuals who could have been incarcerated on bail and are released. Again, we want reform that benefits both parties. And if people don't feel safe in their homes, if people aren't safe when they go to the store, when their kids go to school, all your other rights really pale and don't matter. So the first obligation of good government is to protect its law-abiding citizens. Not violate individuals accused or blamed for crimes, but balance it out so that we have a fair system. Again, we're asking that the legislature come back, have a special session, and address just bail and criminal justice reform in the proper way. Thank you, Senator.
Thank you, Sheriff. Very well said. The Sheriff was referring to this wokeness that's taking place, which I think some of it is leading to this type of violence and unbalancing the scales here. When you go from inmate to incarcerated person, maybe we need a new name for victims, forgotten people. Okay? Is that the new name for victims of these predators? Forgotten people? Because we got HALT, we got this less is more thing, we got raise the age. We're doing a lot of things for the perpetrators. Ask the question, what are we doing for the victims in New York State? We can't even give an victim's impact statement in the state to the real people who are interviewing people up for parole right now. We have a bill to change that. At this time, I'd like to introduce the Gloversville Police Chief, Tony Clay.
Thank you, Senator. My primary role here this morning is to continue to support Tammy, her mom Donna, her sister Tracy, while they're grieving over this senseless tragedy. I do believe it is critical we return discretion to our judges to hopefully have a hand in preventing these kind of tragedies at some point in time. I think that Senator Tedisco's legislation goes a long way to getting us closer to that.
Thank you, Chief. Anyone has any questions? Some of us will be trying to answer it.
So in this specific case, the judge, this was a misdemeanor, so the judge in this case did not have discretion to set bail.
Under the present change, no. Under the previous laws, he would have. She would have. Yes. Because of those qualifiers I talked to you about, which were added to it.
I think it's important to note that in 1994, not only in New York, but across this country, and many remember O.J. Simpson case, legislators in New York State cited O.J. Simpson's case in coming up with a Victim's Bill of Rights. And when I sat on the bench, we moved from allowing in the courtroom a rape victim. You couldn't say the victim. The officers couldn't say the victim. It had to be the complainant. And what we've seen most recently is, as of the other day when the governor signed the bill, that said they can't be called inmates, they're incarcerated persons. But we saw that years ago when somebody was a convict, they were convicted of a crime, and then when they got out of prison, they were ex-cons. Well, the whole movement is taking away the balance in our system. If you're a police officer and 15 years ago somebody made a personnel complaint against you, when you testify, that's admissible. What they want to do is expunge the record of defendants who are convicted criminals, so you can't use their past against them, but you can use an officer's past, even if it was unfounded, that they had an accusation made. So there's an awful lot at stake here, and a lot of things that are not balanced. In the past, we're talking about parole. This is important to note because it's all tied in. In order, a parole officer would file for a hold, and if we picked up somebody who was drunk or intoxicated on drugs, even if we didn't arrest them, we would call parole. If they were on parole, that would be a technical violation and they could be incarcerated. We can't do that any longer. The state has said we're not going to incarcerate parolees on technical violations. And I would suggest to you that if a parolee cannot follow a technical violation, don't drink, don't do drugs, don't stay out after curfew, don't drive if you don't have a license, if they're not going to follow technical rules, then they're not going to follow the other rules we have. So there's a lot of things that the public is not aware of, and I think things happened rapidly, and COVID hit, and people didn't pay attention. A lot was going on. And again, we're not saying that this case wouldn't have happened. We're saying that the judge would have had discretion to set bail, and it might not have happened. But the family deserves the right to be heard, and the public deserves a right to understand that they took away discretion, and that's all this bill does is say, judges, use your discretion on a case-by-case basis, because that's what the whole argument was before, that we're incarcerating people in mass groups without consideration of the individual circumstances. So we should go back to the individual circumstances.
And here's another point. District Attorney Soares had it right the other day. Governor Hochul is using the argument now, well, we fixed it, we reformed it. It's the judges, it's the DAs, they're not charging the right levels to get to the level of bail, cash bail. Well, they changed the levels that you have to get to for very violent crimes. So now they're between a hard place and a rock. DAs are smart. They know if they increase the charge and it doesn't fit the actions, that person's going to walk. You can put them behind bars. When they go before the court, they're going to walk. So they have to charge what they think the crime really is. When they charge what the crime really is, and it's usually violent like this, they look at the new law and they say, well, once we could have put this person on the level of cash bail. Now, because of the qualifiers, we can't do it anymore. So it's a false argument. You can't ask DAs to charge higher than the crime really is, and that's what the DAs are saying. That's what DA Soares, very progressive, not a conservative or anything like that. And he, and as has been mentioned, Mayor Adams, come back and fix this. Nobody is against criminal justice reform. We are not against, nobody here is against criminal justice reform. Don't get that idea. We just want to balance it, as the sheriffs have said and are talking about, between the predators and the victims themselves, the forgotten ones, the forgotten persons.
Are you confident that Governor Hochul will listen to you, will have a special session? What's your message to Governor Hochul?
I'm confident she'll listen, and I'm not confident she'll hear me. There's a difference between listening and really hearing what someone is saying and taking it to heart. Listen, she did that 10-point thing, I think, because there was an election coming up. I don't care why she would do something like that. Only if she did it right, I'd be much more happier. That's what you should do when you get pressure from the people who you represent, the 19.5 million people in New York State. But she didn't do it, so the discretion for these judges kicked in, where we could get people like Mr. Quinlan off the streets before they do something as devastating as this. She's got to go back. We've all got to go back. That's what we're calling for. We agree. And listen, there are a lot of DAs out there from both sides of the aisle. There's a lot of the judiciary. There's a lot of law enforcement who may not be speaking up. But behind the scenes, they're all just about saying the same thing. This is broken. It's a policy that has 3 strikes right now. It's not working. Fix it. We're not against criminal justice reform, but we need to fix this one.
I did want to give everyone an opportunity to reply to a statement that was sent to us by Community Alternatives. Now, in response to both the incident with DA Soares and this one that I had asked them about,
Who are you with, by the way?
Michaela Smith from News 10.
Oh, okay.
The standard that has been misaligned, the least restrictive means to assure a person returns to court, is a constitutional standard, not a new concept created by bail reform. It goes on for a while, but it also mentions that to label that judges have no choice in some of these cases is not necessarily a fair statement, and that it may be more appropriate to say that it's not always well known what they can and can't do in certain situations. I just wanted to put that out there so if anyone wants to respond.
Well, 2 things you said. First of all, it's so complex they can't understand it. I think I heard that in what he's saying. So if it's so complex they can't understand it, they should come back at least with specific goals in mind of what the judges could do. But this is pretty clear in this sense. The qualifiers say this judge could not cash bail this person. So that's a falsehood in terms of the reality of the entire system itself they've put in place. She just couldn't do it because of those qualifiers, with the choking and with the assault, a misdemeanor. Anybody else want to?
I take offense as a former judge that it's the judge's fault they don't know what they're doing. I think there's a certain amount of pressure on lower court judges who may be appointed, or town and village justices that we have upstate, that, well, if I do something wrong, I'm going to be brought up on charges. If I don't let this person go, then I'm going to be in trouble. So I think that there's an unwritten threat out there that if they're not releasing these people and they made a mistake, if it was not the least restrictive, that they could be in trouble. They also changed a lot of the requirements of what we could look at. Well, when you looked at bail, you could look at the past record. You weren't limited to just the last year or 2. You could look at times they didn't go to court and failed to appear. It wasn't just the last 2 years. So you could look at jobs in the community. That's important. Education. And if you recall the ads that were run when they were pushing this, they said people should be able to go home with their families, support their families, work their jobs, and go to school. I can tell you, as a felony judge in county court, not a lot of people who were career criminals did not have regular jobs, were not paying child support, and were not going to school. Let me say that so it doesn't get misrepresented. A lot of the people who came in front of me with a history of criminal conduct, repeat offenders, were not supporting their families, were not working a job, and were not going to school. So the narrative that we have to get people out as quick as possible so they could do those things was never substantiated by studies and research. So, you know, to me, that was a false narrative. And if you're a judge in a lower court or even a superior court, and you say, well, maybe this isn't the least restrictive. If I do this, am I going to be facing a reversal by a superior court? Am I going to be facing an accusation that my action was based improper? You know, so that's an unwritten, subtle pressure, I think, that comes into play. As much as the governor's going to blame the judges, I will say if there is any blame on the judges, it's because of the threat that if you don't let these people out the first time, these people, I mean people accused of serious crimes, then you may be in some sort of trouble.
Go ahead, Chair.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator. Thanks for having us here today. My condolences to the family here. One of your questions was about the governor listening. We're going to continue to get our message out there in regards to these bail reform issues. We're not going to stop, but most importantly, listen to the victims and listen to the victims' families. That's who she needs to speak to and, go forward with. Like the sheriff said, go to Sheriff Murphy's Facebook page that he established probably 2 years ago or when this came out.
Started, yeah.
Yeah, there's got to be close to 100,000 posts on there on reoccurring incidences where somebody's been released and went out and did another crime. So, again, we're going to continue to get our message across, and hopefully they'll come back to listen to us. That's what we're asking for, is a place at the table. But most importantly, listen to the victims, listen to the victims' families.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Sheriff.
Sheriff. Yeah. Sheriff.
Any other questions?
Senator, Mike Lisbella, Saratoga. I was just curious, has there been anything proposed regarding, this recidivism in terms of, Sheriff Zerlo just said about, I'll look through the police blotters every day, and you'll see, multiple, somebody, charged with a crime at 9:30, and then at 11 a.m. they're charged again with another crime. Has there been anything proposed in terms of saying, hey, if somebody's getting arrested multiple times in a day,
Oh, yeah.
that
Excuse me. That's
Yeah.
this bill over here.
Yeah.
Discretion for judges in
Right.
3 areas. They'll be able to look at the background of the person.
Yeah.
We've given them one bite at the apple. That's enough for a person who commits any crime.
Yeah.
After one bite at the apple, that bill says the judge will have discretion. He wouldn't have to, she wouldn't have to take them off the streets with cash bail, but they would have discretion. The third one is if they commit another crime. If they run and they don't show up, if they commit another crime, the judge would have discretion. That's all a part of this bill right over here. There's a lot more we could do, but I know the audience I'm dealing with. I'm trying to get my foot in the door with something that provides more discretion for the judiciary. Yeah, that's the bill right there of what you're talking about.
We reached out to the governor.
Pardon?
We reached out to the governor.
Why don't you tell them that?
About the governor, my family did reach out, and we've heard nothing since. That's why I came to Senator Tedisco and whoever is going to listen to us.
How long ago did you reach out? Same day she contacted him.
The same, yeah.
Thank you so much for being here, and thank you so much for the courage you have.
Thank
You're
you.
helping a lot of other families by making the case. Appreciate
Thank
it.
you.
Appreciate our law enforcement people who, I don't know who would want to be another law enforcement. I give you tremendous credit for the job you're doing under the conditions. Defund and this criminal justice thing is just unbelievable for people who put their lives on the line every day, leave their house and their family not knowing if they're going to come back. When they hear that Velcro come off with the vest, that's when they feel comfortable that they get back in the door. So thank you so much for what you do.
Thank you.
Yep. Thanks, everybody. Good job on those positions for yourself.
Okay, thank you.
Gee, that's fantastic.
Thank you. Thank you.
And that's your dad right there?
An older sister is my sister's wedding. That's my mom too.
We have
Nice
time.
couple.
Oh, they love each other.